Namaste. Welcome to Dev's Hammer Show. This is weekly English talk show on Indigenous television and ITV Nepal. This talk show featurizes in-person and online interviews of guests from different backgrounds. In this talk show, we discuss on various issues affecting Indigenous peoples worldwide. We share the experiences and foster a kind of collaboration and connection between the communities. So every episodes, I invite guests from different walk of life. So in this very special episodes, I have invited very renowned guest from Bangladesh. He is no other than Raja Devashish Roy. He is by profession a lawyer, but more than this, he introduces himself as first Raja, a full circle. Chakma community. Chakma is one of the largest indigenous communities in Bangladesh. And whenever we talk about indigenous peoples, they make a significant number in the population of Bangladesh. Though they are not legally recognized in the constitution, but they are united as such. He also served as member expert in the member expert of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. So to start with, first of all, let me welcome Raja Devashish Roy in my show. Welcome to the show first.
Thank you, Devji. Ju, namaskar, namaste to everybody.
So as I said in background, you wear different hats or different position as well in UN, in your community as such. So I said a little background about you. But to start with, could you introduce yourself briefly? Connecting with your community and your customary governance, and then we start our conversation.
My primary responsibility is as the Chakma Raja or chief of the Chakma territory known as Chakma Circle, where I have responsibility on justice administration. We have our own semi-autonomous system of courts. Then we have other sub-chiefs at different levels from village levels. So we have in my territory, we have 180 territorial headmen and more than 2,000 village heads or chiefs. So I have to look after their functions of like court functions, or also managing natural resources like forests, land for Sweden cultivation, etc. And I advise the government at different levels on affairs of our territory.
In your introduction, you rightly said about the indigenous governance systems, that your role with the justice delivery systems that you worked with. Could you just briefly define or tell us that when we talk about indigenous customary systems or indigenous governance system, what is it all about? How does it function in Bangladesh? Could you just bring some experiences so that we also can connect from Nepal?
Well, before, when we were colonized by the British, then the only system of administration was the traditional system of Raja, chief, headmen, traditional leaders. But now it is a pluralistic system. To that has been added more layers of governance. So there is the central government's civil servants at district and sub-district levels. And then from the late 80s, and particularly after the 1997, we had the Chittagong-Hillcrest Accord of 1997, which stopped a 20-year guerrilla war. So we also have councils at district and regional levels. So if you like, three types of administration: traditional administration, from the central government civil administration, and our councils at different levels. So our roles are defined by law. Sometimes there is overlap, but generally our functions are separate. We do not deal with, for example, development, that is the councils, projects and all that. Then they have the civil servants, but they sometimes supervise our traditional administration as well at village level to cluster of villages. So in some areas we are autonomous, in others we have to work with other governmental or council.
So you rightly said about the Chittagong Hill Tracks occurred, which concluded in 1997. And worldwide, whenever we talk about the indigenous people's issues from Bangladesh, this Chittagong Hill Tracks occurred comes to the center, actually. What is that occurred all about? As you already said that it concluded the 20 years guerrilla war in Nepal. Was that guerrilla war fought by indigenous peoples, or what does that occurred? What is the meaning of this for the indigenous peoples as such?
Well, you see, the history of our region very similar to other parts of Northeast India, like Mizoram, Tripura, and even Burma, Myanmar, like Chin state, which we have border with, Rakhine state. So we were sort of independent because at that time the empires and kingdoms of the plains had no interest for us. We had a lot of forests. It was very remote, rugged, hilly terrain. So after the British came to this part of South Asia, they included us, they annexed us and tagged us to Bengal. Now gradually our autonomy became weaker and weaker. And so by the time Bangladesh became independent, there was a new country, and our leaders felt that we should have constitutional recognition of the separate status of the Chittagong Hill Tracts region, as well as a democratized process of representation and inclusion. So they demanded autonomy from the new Bangladesh government in 1972. But unfortunately, the demand for autonomy was not met, nor the demand for constitutional recognition. So that is coming now in 2024. We are asking for appropriate recognition of our identity and status and our self-government system. So you see in the 70s, when this demand was led by a lawyer, Manabendra Narayan Larma, when this demand was denied, so then it changed from a constitutional movement to an armed movement where a guerrilla war started between the government and the guerrilla force known as Shanti Bahini, peace fighters. And so that continued for more than 20 years. There was a lot of human rights violation. There were many deaths and other human rights violations. But anyway, in 1997, an agreement or accord was signed by the JSS, that is the regional political party, known in short, for limited autonomy or self-government and rehabilitation, etc. But unfortunately, most of the biggest elements of this accord or agreement have not been implemented until today.
So what is the reason? What is one of the best reason that even after this 26 years of conclusion of this occurred, the provisions are not implemented properly? Is that because the indigenous peoples are not united, or the government is not willing to address the issues of indigenous peoples? What do you think, being a chief of your community?
I think the main reason is that we are somewhat like an anomaly in Bangladesh, 1/10 of the territory of Bangladesh bordering India and Burma or Myanmar is topographically different from the rest of the country, ethnically different. Our spiritual religious traditions are different, and we were not ruled by the Mughals like the rest of Bangladesh was. We were outside, as I was saying. Nobody was interested in our jungles and hills at that time. So therefore there is insufficient understanding on mainstream politicians, civil servants about our history, our constitutional history, our political history, and therefore there is sometimes what we say discrimination. If I am discrimination, it does not matter. It is because you have ill will towards me or because you don't understand me. But in either case, the fact is that if our rights, our identity is not understood, then we don't really get to be treated the way we should be treated in a democratic country.
Just I want to bring back the conversation that you brought. One of the issues that in Nepal or Nepali indigenous communities are also raising about right to autonomy, right to self-determinations, and we also are looking into some of the practices around the globe, including Bangladesh. We also take some of the lessons. Earlier, when there was a process of writing a new constitution in Nepal, you were also a part of ILO team to conduct a study as well, so that you also have looked the development of indigenous peoples of Nepal closely. What lessons could indigenous peoples of Nepal learn from, let's say, advocating unitedly for the right to autonomy or self-determinations from Bangladesh?
I would say that there are two among many other areas which could be relevant to what I understand of the situation of Adivasi Janjati in Nepal. One of them is in the area of customary law. I think that compared to Nepal, although our self-government is not very of a high level, but compared to Nepal, I think customary law, both customary law as regards family law, inheritance, marriage, etc., but more importantly, customary law as regards lands and natural resources like forests. I think here the recognition of customary law in the Bangladeshi system is reasonably good. I would not say very, very good, but compared to Chittagong Hill Tracts in northeast India, in Mizoram and Nagaland, and that is even better. It has some similarities with maybe Sabah and Sarawak in Malaysia, ex-British colony. So customary law, and I think that could be a way of really, in Nepal, looking at and reviving stronger community-oriented, community-led customary regimes on collective use lands, forests, water bodies, grazing lands, etc.
When you talk about, as you said, about the customary law or customary governance system playing a role in the conservations, so around the world, whenever indigenous peoples bring issues in regards to connecting with climate change or protecting of biodiversity, the role of customary institution or customary governance system playing big role in this all. Could you just share some of the thoughts how this customary governance systems or customary laws play in protecting the biodiversity or addressing this climate change, global climate change?
In our case, and I have seen in other places too, the traditional authorities or traditional leaders, this can vary. Sometimes it's hereditary, sometimes it's consensually the leadership is recognized. But the important thing is that these customary leaders applying customary law, which has a very deep relationship with indigenous spirituality. We have our gods, our goddesses, and deities and spirits whom we have respect for. So that brings in 2 or 3 dimensions which is very, very relevant in today's climate change, the challenges we face. One is our spiritual traditions generally is very kind towards the animal world and towards the plants and trees. I give you an example that our Chakma people and sometimes Tripura people, we would never touch the salt on a natural salt lake, mineral salt. We as children, we thought that if we touch it, we would get leprosy or some skin disease. So for hundreds of years, we bought the salt from Chittagong, the coastal area, from our Bengali brothers and sisters, but we never touched the mineral salt, which was used by the elephant, wild elephant, bison, deer, and all. So there are many other traditions where we have the respect for other users of the same resources. It could be animal, it could be another community. So that is one, it is ecologically very, very good. The other thing is, it is democratic in the sense of there is always a concern for the most disadvantaged individuals in our society. It could be a widow, it could be a widower, it could be an elderly. So when we have our collective Sweden cultivation, we would always have a system that if a family does not have enough people to work in the field or to repair the house, the whole community must come and help that individual or family to repair the house or harvest the crop, or they may have insufficient harvest. Then it is the responsibility of the community to contribute. So if there's a pregnant woman, you will need to take rice and very nutritious food there. Then some woman has given birth, then the whole community will have to go and take food for her. So these are many things I think that are very, very relevant when we deal with the challenges of climate change, but also all the biodiversity loss that is happening, all our natural water resources are being depleted because of profit-oriented development or I don't know, economic needs and concerns, or at least what the state nowadays goes for, economics. But that sort of economics of just, per capita such and such development is doing such bad things to nature and biodiversity and water and other natural resources.
So now, as you are attending the international conference on indigenous-led research and education in Nepal currently, whenever we talk about indigenous-led research or education or so forth, we cannot forget the existence of indigenous governance systems or indigenous peoples as such. If there is not existence of indigenous community or indigenous governance systems, there is no way of conducting indigenous-led research or education as such. But around the world, there has been a kind of movement to advocate or advance the indigenous-led research or education. To what extent do you think that is the need of the current situation, for the promotion of this sort of indigenous-centered education, indigenous-centered research, right? Indigenous-centric kind of thought or knowledge productions?
Particularly with climate change, but also regarding environment and development, what indigenous people's researchers bring in is, I think they speak two languages. They can, especially those with an academic background, they understand the knowledge of the academic world, mainstream. But they also understand the traditions and cultures of their own peoples and communities. So they are the best interlocutors to help share traditional knowledge and indigenous knowledge, which is conducive to environment and climate change, with the rest of the world. But of course there are still challenges, like I was in Glasgow along with the traditional elders from, I don't know, Mustang or somewhere up in the mountains. There was a Sami, there was somebody from Bolivia, and how they were sharing so much knowledge which is necessary. They know how the fish are going, where the bear eats what, how the water is drying up or coming, how the ice is melting. All of these things, many of these elders and indigenous peoples understand to a great, great detail, which I think it will take tens of years for mainstream researchers to actually understand the interaction between nature and life forms, animals, birds, plants, insects. And the problem is with the climate change system is that so-called scientific knowledge, peer review, publication in journals, otherwise it is not accepted as quote-unquote scientific. Problem here is that if you go through that entire process, if there is no shortcut or at least benefit of doubt that this knowledge is probably scientific, then what happens is then we will be losing a lot of our knowledge. And also because these are mostly oral. We are brought up in an oral tradition, and now but in 2024 we have come to a writing culture, even with the indigenous peoples. So a lot of this is getting lost. So we have to try to find new ways. Even within indigenous peoples, we have to learn new ways of how some of these oral traditions will continue through oral traditions, but how some of them could be reduced into writing without losing the essence, and how it is necessary for our own peoples and communities, but also for the rest of the world.
That's good that you brought that the indigenous peoples are rich in terms of the world knowledge, as you say. But recently, there has been some attempts made by the international communities to document. So earlier, I came to read your research about the traditional or oral indigenous knowledge systems in your study. What are some of your recommendations? How the today's context, the science or the community actually can document the indigenous oral system or world knowledge into a writing system? What are the ways? What were some of the findings when you conducted that? The indigenous knowledge systems, the role and documentations, and I also read some of your recommendation too. So if you have to, if you want to record those recommendations, recall those.
I think it is important that we understand that indigenous peoples, we have our own worldview. We look at the world from generally an intergenerational aspect. I would generally think what happens to my son or daughter or granddaughter or grandson, how they are going to use this territory which my grandmother, my great-grandfather was using. So that we bring in something which is much more sustainable than what you would just for earning money for just one generation. So we have to, I think, talk more about our worldview. Our worldview is deeply connected to our spiritualities. But of course, there are some practical problems, especially when you are writing in a certain language, a Western language, then you are losing something. And then there are also many of the holders of our traditions probably do not write in the national language here, Nepali, Bengali in Bangladesh, or even if it is international languages like English or whatever. So these are also challenges where I think the indigenous run academic institutions, universities, faculties, departments, they will have to find out new ways. And I don't think there is a magic formula that is going to cover everything from Nepal to Bangladesh or it is Norway or Brazil. But there are, I think, good examples coming up where indigenous communities are now trying to revitalize their traditions. They are talking about it. They are trying to practice it. But of course here, the challenge is also within our indigenous peoples, how the younger people who press the buttons of the new phones and laptops and older generations like us. So we need to find new ways of talking to each other. So many of them call me grandfather or great uncle, but we have to learn ways of talking to each other, the young generation and the older generation, and work together for our people and also for humanity.
So we are now almost at the end of our conversation, but then I want to, before I forget, I want to ask you just, to what extent you can answer. But then the status of indigenous peoples in Bangladesh recently, what you said in 2024, indigenous peoples of Bangladesh now reviving the demand of recognizing constitutionally, and new interim government actually has taken up the role also there. So could you just tell me a kind of a situation of indigenous peoples in Bangladesh and actually their demand currently that they are making with the new government, and also connecting with recent kind of political development that I came to read that there was a kind of political uprising as well, and targeting to some of the indigenous community as such, though that is a political one. But in that way, the role of local governments or chief, just like you.
Well, we have tried to take this opportunity, and we have met the new head of government, Dr. Muhammad Yunus, and other ministerial position leaders who are in the interim government, and we are saying that as in the rest of the country for other citizens of Bangladesh, the indigenous citizens of Bangladesh also want to be part of this new democratize Bangladesh, and people are talking about a new constitution, or at least a reform of the constitution. So we have been discussing that, and our indigenous peoples, particularly in the Chittagong Hill Tracts, but also rest of Bangladesh, are saying that our identity and status must be respectfully and appropriately acknowledged in the constitution. Our self-government system in the Chittagong Hill Tracts, this needs to be also recognized in the constitution so that it is not eroded. So our people, indigenous peoples, are taking part with our Bengali speaking brothers and sisters in the whole movement to carve out, redesign a new Bangladesh. But we hope that this is done in a way that the government is sensitive to our identity, our concerns. But there is also some developments in our region recently. There have been some deaths as well with the security forces' role and riots. So we have demanded that there be independent, impartial commission of inquiry to look into the human rights violations. But of course, we would like to hope that the new government carries the indigenous peoples together, no matter how small our number is. And at this conference, I want to say one thing, in case I forget, that I will be talking about tomorrow, is customary law. I think customary law is a very important tool for indigenous peoples because they are in the driving seat. The Chief Justice does not say what is customary law. The legislature of the state does not say what is customary law. Customary law by definition is law made by the community, by the people. So that way it is inclusive, it is democratic, it is also flexible, it is time tested. And I think in the environmental world and in sustainable use of forests and other lands, I think the states would do well to be more respectful towards customary laws on land, forest, water use. And also for indigenous peoples, we are, in a way, we are in control that we define what customary law. So in our engagement with the state, as well as the market economy, other external forces, we can negotiate from a position of strength. And that is strength for us and strength for the whole state and government, etc. as well.
So as I said, we have come almost end. So if you have anything that you want to add, something, or that I didn't ask you, but you want to say something, or maybe one-line message for the indigenous peoples of Nepal, what we can learn from, a kind of from Bangladesh or around the world, or based on your expertise?
Of course, I know that 2015 was many indigenous peoples, the Adivasi Janjati, were very hurt. They were unhappy that appropriate constitutional rights did not come as they hoped for. But I still think that the Adivasi Janjati of Nepal could also still invoke the present constitutional arrangements, which is not, I know they are not very happy, but still it is there to make use. And I think that there are the protected areas and special areas, I forget the terminology. There are good examples to use, I think, from Bangladesh, also Northeast India, where there is limited autonomy at the local level, where they can design such a way that the engagement of the indigenous peoples, both with the federal government in Kathmandu as well as the provincial government, is in both ways that the indigenous peoples can have their voice and be an effective part of governance and administration. It's difficult. I know it's difficult, but I wish our brothers and sisters the best in their struggle, and I hope the government of Nepal will also take a wise and good, kind look at the Adivasi Janjati and to work together.
Thank you so much, Raja Devashish Roy, for joining on the Dev's Hammer Show, and also for your insights. In relation with the indigenous peoples of Bangladesh, more focused with the governance system, indigenous governance systems. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Devji, and greetings due to the viewers and everybody.
With this, we have reached at the end of the show. But the conversation continues. If you have any queries or feedbacks regarding you can reach out to us at indigenoustelevision@gmail.com. Next week, we'll come up with new guest, featuring new guest and fresh topics. Until then, have a wonderful weekend. Namaste.